Howdy, howdy, my fellow gamers, and welcome back to another episode of Storytime with Freak today as we begin our proper dive into Gears of War, Aspho Fields. We're going to read more than one chapter per episode. I'm not going to say that they're going to be hour-long episodes. They might be 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. It really just depends on how we're going. My hand is still pretty injured, so holding the book hurts. So without further ado, though, Chapter 1. I swear I thought the place was a museum when I walked in. I mean, it was a huge, full of books and old paintings. And deserted, you know? That kind of dead silence that says, just shut your mouth and feel the awe of history. And then Marcus's mom came through the door like she hadn't seen us, reading some newspapers she had in her hand, and she says, "Hi, sweetheart. You brought some friends home? I'll catch up with you later." Then she was gone. I saw the look on Marcus's face and knew right then that the guy needed a brother a whole lot more than he needed a library. Carlos Santiago, describing his first visit to Marcus Phoenix's family mansion at the age of 10. Afira, present day, 14 AE. Dom Santiago decided that there was one good thing about a phantom sniper blowing a locust's brains all over his face. It took his mind off of worrying how many locusts were still around. His legs were shaking as he moved to the edge of the pit that had opened up in the paving and aimed his rifle below, just in case the grubs had backup on the way. The shakes were just like the aftershock of the adrenaline, but liar, I nearly shit myself. The grub was choking the life out of me. A round missed my brain by inches. That's fear. Forget adrenaline. No, it never stopped being terrifying. The day it did, he'd really be dead. In the tangle of broken pipes and cables below, nothing stirred beyond the clicking and settling soil and stones. Dom couldn't feel anything under his boots now except the slight rocking movement of broken paving. The vibrations deep in the planet had vanished for the time being, and the smell of charred-grilled dog had been overwhelmed by shattered bowels and pulverized concrete. "Hey, smartass!" Baird called up to the empty street. "Nice shot. Now show yourself." "Better shout louder," Cole said. He could be a mile away. It was always hard to spot a sniper, but in this maze of destruction and shadows, there were 1,000 places to lay up and wait for trade. Marcus squatted down and examined what was left of the locust's skull again. Then he looked up and gestured in the general direction of the south side of the street. "No, a lot closer." The round went in near the top of the head. High angle, and a lot of kinetic energy left. Dom looked where Marcus was pointing, trying to work out where the sniper would have had a clear line of sight. Marcus backed slowly to the nearest wall and pressed his fingers to his earpiece. Dom listened in. "Delta to control. Any sniper teams to the south of Embry? Any gears at all?" "Negative, Delta." It was Lieutenant Stroud. Anya Stroud, still on duty after 18 hours. The woman never seemed to sleep. If Delta Squad was awake, so was she. "Need one?" "Not anymore." "Don't leave me in suspense, Sergeant. We got a joker loose with an obsolete sniper rifle. He's helpful now, but he might not stay that way. Thanks for the heads up. I'll pull it out on an advisory." Cole was still focused on the roofline. Baird lowered his lantern and started walking again. "Let's get out. Maybe they got a sudden dose of patriotism and realize they owe us now the war is nearly over." "Maybe," Marcus said. He was aiming at Dom and missed, and it's not over. "Stranded never fire on us. They're not that dumb. Old rifle, great shot." Marcus reloaded casual and apparently in no hurry, so I'm curious. Bear didn't look back as he picked his way over fallen masonry. Plenty of stranded are good shots. Doesn't mean we have to go find them and enlist them. Baird had a good point. As long as nobody was shooting at them, it wasn't their problem. But if someone had a sniper rifle, Dom knew it was stolen. Obsolete or not, the things were scarce. A handful of factories struggled to produce spares, let alone crank out new weapons. Every operational piece of kit from Ravens to armadillos to assault rifles was a losing battle between maintenance and decay. Like all gears, Dom cannibalized parts from anything he could grab. Baird was a master at it. "Yeah, we need to know," Dom said. "Because if the rifle isn't stolen, that means the owner's one of us, a veteran." Baird paused to pick up something, then he held it closer to his face to examine it. Dom could see it was the servo part of some kind. "It's old kit, they're thieving scum." Baird pocketed the servo. "Because no gear is going to hang around with street vermin if he's capable of shooting." Again, the cocky little bastard was right. Dom wanted to see him proved wrong someday, if only to shut his mouth for a while. Yes, veteran gears re-enlisted after Emergence Day, even some really old guys, because there were two choices for any man worth a damn. Fight with the COG forces any way he could, or rot. The only excuse for not fighting the Locust was being dead. "Every rifle counts," Dom called after him. No, the war wasn't over. And every man. He turned to Marcus and gestured toward the likely direction of fire. "Give me 10 minutes. "You've got me curious too," Cole said, resting his lantern against his shoulders. "I think I'll join you." Marcus sighed. "Okay, but keep your comm channels open. Baird, get your ass back here." Half of the city block had been a bank headquarters, surrounded by snack and coffee shops that lived off of an army of clerks. It was all derelict now. Dom could just about remember how it had looked before E-Day. The ranks of neatly wrapped sandwiches and the window displays filled with the kind of delicacies nobody could get a hold of now. Food in the army was adequate, better than anything the Stranded had, but it wasn't fun. Dog. Damn, who'd eat a dog? The glittering granite facade was just a shell now, with a few hardy plants rooted in cracks in the ashlars. Nothing much grew here. It didn't get the chance. Dom and Cole edged inside the burned-out bank and looked up to see that there were no floors and nowhere to hide. It was a big empty box. Everything that could be hauled away and reused, wood, metal, cable, pipes, had been scavenged long before. Well, shit, said Cole cheerfully. I had my fortune stashed here. Cole had been a pro thrashball star, a rich man in a world long gone. Wealth was measured in skills and barter now. He always treated his worthless millions as a big joke. He could find humor in just about any situation. But there was nothing left to buy that a gear needed. Dom decided that when he returned to life normal, even after 14 years, he had to think that it could. He'd follow Cole's example and treat money as easy come, easy go. People were what mattered. You couldn't replace them, and they didn't earn interest. They just slipped away a day at a time, and you had to make the most of every precious moment. When I find Maria, I won't take a single minute for granted. Dom scanned the interior and peered down into a deep crater where the polished marble counter had once been. Nothing moved, but he could see the old vault's doors blown open. Yeah, better cancel that order for the yacht. Hey, Dom, you won't find no snipers down there, Cole shoved him in the shoulder. Heads up. The back of the bank building was a sloping mound of rubble and debris, like scree that had tumbled down the mountainslide. Above the ramp of bricks, stone facing and snap joists, the rear wall rose like a cliff, and the top row of empty window frames formed deep arches. Now that was a good position for a sniper. Depending on what was behind the wall, of course. Dom slung his lancer over his shoulders and scrambled up the slope for a better look. Nobody home, Dom, Cole followed him. Don't you get enough exercise? Just wanted to get a look-see from the top. Dom grabbed a rusted steel bar and hauled himself over the stumps of the joints that jutted from the wall. His oversized boots weren't ideal for climbing, and he had to rely on his upper body strength more than the momentum from his legs, so getting down again was going to be interesting, because he'd have to be at this height to get that shot in. Dom heaved himself onto a windowsill and stood, his hands braced against the stone uprights on either side. It was a big, solid wall, built like a bastion and thick enough for him to stand on comfortably even in gears boots. On the other side, adjacent buildings in various states of collapse provided crude stairs to the ground level. If anyone had been up there, he'd have a relatively easy route down. See anything? Cole called. Usual shit. Dom scanned 180 degrees. Not exactly a postcard to send home unless you live in an even bigger cesspit. Below the city still looked like a small deserted battlefield, sterile and treeless. Smoke curled upward in thin wisps from domestic fires Dom couldn't see. There was a visible demarcation between the parts of the city that stood on thick granite, the last cogged stronghold, and the outlying areas where fissures and soft rock let the locusts tunnel in. The line lay between a recognizable city, buildings mostly in one piece, and a devastated hinterland. The line itself, well, that was a margin in which most of the stranded seemed to live. The unsecured areas where they took their chances. Their choice, not ours. It wasn't the view Dom was used to by the crew bay of the King Raven Chopper. It was static, deceptively peaceful, not racing and rolling beneath him in a sequence of disjointed images. He had a few moments to think. Even after 10 years, he found himself trying to visualize where Maria might be now. And then he began wondering how they'd ever rebuild Sarah. And the idea was so overwhelming that he did the sensible thing and just thought about how he was going to get through the next few hours alive. Dom, stand there much longer and somebody's going to shoot your ass off for the hell of it, Cold Call. Let's commandeer a vehicle and cover some ground. Dom wasn't so sure the sniper had gone far. It was hard to move fast across terrain like this. You had to crawl, climb, burrow, duck, and that made it perfect to hide in. Whoever he was, Dom was sure he'd hang around. He'll be back. Dom tried not to think about the drop below. He just turned around and jumped, relying on the give and the loose rock and the thick soles of his boots to cushion the impact. It still shook him to his teeth. He's making a point. Not sure what, but Marcus had news to take his mind off the sniper. Move it, guys. Echo's got grub surfacing 3 clicks west. Means they might still be moving along the Sovereign Boulevard Fisher. We can get there before anyone gets a Raven airborne. Marcus's voice rarely varied from a weary monotone. Even when he had to shout, all he did was turn up the volume. There was seldom any trace of anger or urgency, although Dom knew damn well that it was all that still battened down, and there certainly wasn't any hint of triumph now. Numbers? Dom asked. 12. That means they're thinning out, Baird said. He fancied himself as the resident locust expert, and he was. Looks like we did it. We bombed the shit out of them. Dom prodded Baird in the chest as he passed him, friendly, but pointed. You mean Marcus did it? He's the one who shoved the light masks down their grub throats. Well, maybe Hoffman will hand him back his medals after all. Knock it off. Marcus turned and jogged in the direction of the Sovereign. Most patrols were on foot, out of necessity. APCs were in ever shorter supply. The stragglers could still outnumber us. Do a head count. Dom prided himself on hanging in there. Just like his dad, just like his brother Carlos. You didn't lose heart. You didn't lose hope. Resilience, Carlos called it. A man had to be resilient and not crumble at the first setback. But after 14 years of fighting, there were only a few million humans left, and Dom was ready to grab at any prospect of the nightmare coming to an end. No, it'll be a different kind of nightmare. Restarting civilization from scratch. But it beats thinking every day will be your last. The only thing that bothered Dom about dying now was that it would end his hunt for Maria. Right behind you, he said, and ran after Marcus. Office of the Chairman Richard Prescott, COG Headquarters, Jacinto. Colonel Victor Hoffman arrived 5 minutes early for the meeting and diverted to the bathroom to tidy his uniform. It wasn't much of a uniform, and this battered building wasn't much of an HQ. But if he started treating anything as not mattering, anything at all, then the rot would set in. This was how civilization was maintained. This was how a culture survived. Museums and art galleries could be reduced to rubble and human society on Sarah would carry on unscathed. But the way a man conducted himself, the basic rules of every moment of each day, that was all that stood between the last humans on Sarah and chaotic savagery. It had to be maintained at all costs. So Hoffman checked for stubble on chin and scalp, straightened his collar, and tried to disguise the signs that, yet again, he hadn't had a chance to sleep in 36 hours. What's going to kill me first? This job or the locust? The door behind him opened just a crack, judging by the muffled voice. A woman's voice. He froze, then checked his zipper. The chairman will see you when you're ready, sir. A man couldn't even take a leak in peace these days. Hoffman didn't turn around. He replaced his cap. Thank you. Give me a minute. He counted silently to 60, contemplating his reflection in a mirror. Then he had also seen better days, and turned on his heel to walk the few yards down the corridor to Prescott's office. It was a room that hadn't been refurbished since before E-Day. That, at least, won the politician a few points. He was taking the shortages like everyone else. Victor, Prescott said. He stood up in front of the makeshift display board covered in sheets of paper, studying each in turn, then glanced over his shoulder. Take a seat. Are things as hopeful as they look? Hoffman folded his cap and tried not to gaze longingly at the coffee on Prescott's desk. He picked up the briefing notes that were always crisp and ready for him at these pointless monthly meetings and leafed through the digests. Food stockpiles, 10% lower than the target. Munitions, 3% below target output. Utilities, domestic power supplies, less than 12 hours a day. Business as usual. All I could say, Chairman, is that since the Lighthouse bomb detonation, we've seen mainly locust drones and in considerably reduced numbers. Normally, we'd encounter the full spectrum of locust types over the course of a week. Boomers, nemesists, reavers, you name it, and a lot more drones. Hoffman stopped. That was all he had to say. Prescott stared at him as if waiting for him to continue and give him good news to announce. In the brief silence, an antique clock ticked like the sound of stones falling off a ledge. Prescott's patient held out a long, slow 6 seconds. So did it work? Has the bomb worked? Hoffman didn't like hope these days. It always tended to get crushed. He pinned down his thoughts in the realms of the measurable and predictable as much as he could. It destroyed the Locust Citadel, he said carefully. It wasn't quite how he'd felt when the Lightmass bomb ripped the guts out of the Locust Tunnel, but there was no reason to bullshit Prescott. We're seeing a lot fewer on the surface, and they got rid of most of the krill. But short of strolling down their tunnels and doing a head count, I don't know what the overall effect's been. Time will tell. People need good news to keep going, Victor, and when we get some, sir, you'll be the first to know. Morale's a commodity. For the Army, too. Equipment failures went beyond critical a long time ago. Hoffman had the same conversation with Prescott every month, like clockwork. We're going to have to think about diverting more civilian resources to arms manufacture. How am I going to justify that with fewer locust incursions? Shit, I can't win either way, can I? With respect, who do you need to justify it to? The population. They're running on empty, like you. Without an effective army, they'll be running on dead. I don't want any more riots over rationing and power cuts. Look, Chairman, for the moment, my gears aren't as busy as usual. It's a good time to divert some resources into replacing as much equipment as we can. Even if the Locusts have been defeated, you'll still need a strong army during Reconstruction. Once certain groups think the pressure is off, you'll have a whole new bucket of problems on your hand. Top us up now, while we've got breathing space. It was all true, all solid doctrine, but Hoffman knew to play politicians. They were short-term thinkers, but flag up a good threat to focus them, and they dragged their eyes to the more distant horizon. Hoffman actually didn't have the luxury of thinking beyond keeping his men fed and armed for the next day, week, month. So if Prescott got off his back and concentrated on civil unrest and Reconstruction, it was one less hassle to deal with. I do understand, Prescott said. I've worn the uniform. For 18 months. For appearances. Ever been under fire? No. Then you'll know society's deal, sir. Gears put their lives on the line, and civilians make sure they've got enough kit and support to do the job. Anything less is morally unacceptable, and it's also a recipe for defeat. Prescott wandered over to the window and folded his arms, staring out over the city. The grime on the glass, there was no maintenance these days. None of the trappings of a less brutal war gave the Jacinto skyline a softer, more flattering focus. He let out a long breath. The average adult male citizen is getting by on 2,300 calories a day, which is about a third of a gear's intake. Woman on 1,800. Powers off for more than 12 hours in every 26. Water processing can't keep up. If we don't tie family food rations to keep the children in school, we'd have feral packs of kids roaming the streets now. My job's to keep society running, Victor, any way I can. I have to think past wars. My job is tomorrow. Well, I'm just a warfighter, Hoffman said carefully. My job is to make sure that there will be a tomorrow. Okay, it's been easy to motivate people against this enemy, Prescott said. It's not the pendulum wars. Locusts aren't remotely human. Nobody's got a grub relative overseas with a different side of the story to tell. They're the atheists of humankind, real monsters. But the hate and tribalism only unite societies so far. We've lasted 14 years. Hoffman stood up to put on his cap. Long plastics made him line up the badge with his nose almost unconsciously, running the edge of his right forefinger down over the metal white, while his left hand positioned the back of the cap. Sometimes, when he felt the death's head emblem, it made him wonder if the badge was a boast or a prediction. This is a siege. I'm good at sieges. Give me an objective and I'll tell you if I can do it with the kit and men available. I'll see what I can do, said Prescott. Hoffman knew he'd get lost when he heard it. It was all men now, near enough. The pendulum war days of women in uniform were largely over. As Hoffman left, a girl in a sober blue business suit, maybe the girl who opened the bathroom door, stood at the filing cabinet with her back to him. When she closed the drawer and turned, he could see she was several months pregnant. That was a priority job now, not just replacing engine parts and weapon components, but replacing humans. Longer lead time, though. Ma'am, he said politely, touching a finger to his cap and walking out into the square. It might have been his imagination, but the sky was less heavily clouded than usual. He looked up and saw nothing. Nothing was good news. His radio crackled. In his earpiece, Lieutenant Stroud's voice sounded a little more strained than usual. Sir, 2 more drone incursions. Delta are headed for Sovereign to RV with Echo Squad. Thanks, Lieutenant. Now go get some sleep. You're not the only control commander we've got. Tell Matthiasen to get his lazy ass in that seed. Yes, sir. Stroud out. The link went dead. Anya Stroud didn't fool Hoffman. Delta got extra attention from her, and it wasn't thanks to their refined taste in the arts. If she thought she could mend Marcus Phoenix and make a decent man out of him, then Hoffman had overestimated her intelligence, but it wasn't his place to lecture her on pining after grossly unsuitable men. As long as she didn't let it interfere with her duties, it was her private problem. And she wasn't her poor mother. Poor kid. It must have been damned hard to grow up in the shadow of Helena Stroud. Or Adam Phoenix, come to that. Hoffman brought himself to a halt, just short of actually feeling sorry for the man's son. You still got a lot of ground to make up with me, Phoenix, Hoffman said out loud. He made his way down the road to headquarters, suddenly wanted to pick up a rifle on the way. He hadn't reacted that way in a long time. Now he felt naked with only his sidearm, even the defended heart of the city. A lot of ground. Sovereign Boulevard, Jacinto. Dom could hear firing long before Delta reached the junction with the boulevard. Marcus broke into a faster run, then sprinted toward the sound. He's gonna get us killed, Barry muttered, maintaining a steady jog. Asshole. Cole gave him a playful shove in the back, which was a hefty blow from a guy built like a brick shithouse. Barrett almost fell. Come on, baby! Cole overtook him. He could still sprint like a pro. You don't want to get an ugly one! There was only ugly and uglier to choose from when it came to Locust. Dom switched comm circuits to pick up Echo Sergeant Rossi, swearing a blue streak as he emptied his magazine. Delta, you took your frickin' time. Marcus's voice cut in. Yeah, well, we're here now. Want a hand? We're 2 men down. What do you think? We're holed up in the mall. Soon would be good. They said the world was divided into these folks who ran away from danger and those who ran toward it. It was funny how you could overcome that instinct to get the hell out if you were trained hard enough. Dom's legs were moving independently of his brain as he rounded the corner behind Cole. He saw what was giving Rossi's men problems. It was the biggest boomer he'd ever seen, and a squad of its drone buddies. The boulevard was a big open space with precious little cover. Dom and the rest of Delta made their way up the road by darting from doorway to doorway and laid up for a moment behind an overturned dumpster. The whole area south of the House of Sovereigns had once been full of manicured trees, expensive stores, and pavement cafes beyond Dom's pack. But he'd window shopped here with Maria before the kids were born. It was hard to tell that it had ever been a nice place, except for the shattered stone facades. All the white marble statues that stood in the wall niches had long gone. Dom couldn't even see where the raised flower beds had been. The boomer and accompanying drones were preoccupied with the entrance to the mall, another converted period building. Its weathered doors were long gone, but the security shutter, a huge steel portcullis, suspended between fluted columns, had been lowered. The boomer was rattling it as easily as a night watchman checking for a flimsy door. The shutter wasn't going to last much longer. Marcus had his don't say anything I'm calculating face on. Rossi, he said, finger in his earpiece. Rossi, is the mezzanine door floor above the entrance still intact? Rossi's voice was almost drowned out by gunfire. Yeah, all the way around the atrium. Height's about 5 meters. Have you got control of the shutter? Sphincters? No. Shutter? Yes. Raise it on my mark. We've got grubs inside, too. I wasn't planning on letting reinforcements in. Just raise it when I say. Want to share? Let the boomer in and leave the rest to us. We'll go in from the top. Rossi went silent for a moment. Dom heard a voice in the background urging someone called David to hang in there. They had wounded to evacuate. Haven't got much choice, have we, Rossi said. Standing by. Keep your channel open. Marcus turned. Okay, we got 2 exits at the rear of the mall, accessible from loading bays. Up the fire escape, along the mezzanine, and then Dom and I drop the broomer from above. What do I do then? Catch up on my knitting? Baird said. And how do you know the layout? My mom used to go there when I was a kid, Marcus said quietly. I explored. And that's what we're banking on? Your mom's shopping trips? Dom was certain that Marcus was going to punch Baird out sooner or later. He'd never seen Marcus lose his temper, but nobody could take Baird's whining every day without wanting to kick the living shit out of him. The longer Marcus took it in silence, the bigger the eruption Dom expected. Yeah, Marcus sighed. So you and Cole give us covering fire if the grubs spot us moving. Once we're in and the shutter lifts, close up and go in behind them. Baird was still muttering over the comms channel about what a crap plan it was while Dom followed Marcus back the way they'd come and slipped down a side road to circle around the block. Just as Marcus had said, there was a rear entrance to the mall. The walls were still intact. The doors were missing. Dom checked his lantern and followed Marcus into what was obviously familiar territory for him. When you say drop the boomer, Marcus, define drop. Jump him. Take his head off. Boomers were so big and powerful they could carry small artillery pieces. They were also as dumb as planks, nowhere near as smart as drones. So one way to beat their sheer power was to outthink them and get close so they couldn't use their weapons. As long as they don't rip your head off first, of course. Marcus shot up the stairs 2 at a time, running on some childhood map that was obviously still vivid in his memory. Dom had spent much childhood with him, but he'd never been here. Maybe it hadn't been a happy place for him. Yeah, I thought that's what you meant, Dom said. Close quarters. He'll break our fall. Yes, Marcus meant jump, too. What the hell am I going to do if he gets killed? Losing the kids had been bad enough, but when Maria went missing, Marcus had somehow held Dom together, whether he realized it or not. The guy was his friend, and his last link to happier times. He wasn't replaceable. Not in a ravaged world like this. The only upside was that everyone, absolutely everyone, had lost family and friends. You didn't grieve alone. You were understood. I'm not going to let him get himself killed. Marcus, oblivious to Dom's worries, kicked open a door at the top of the stairs. The 2 men stared into pitch blackness. Lights, Marcus said sounding as if he was talking to himself. He always did from the moment Dom first met him. The corridor had no natural light. Why can't they give us a damn flashlight? Okay. This passage runs past the management offices and opens onto the mezzanine by the elevator. What if they changed the layout since you were last here? It's a protected historical building. They had to preserve the internal walls. It was the kind of obscure stuff Marcus was good at remembering and it had always come in handy. After 50 yards feeling their way with their hands against the walls, they had turned hard right. Dom could see a bright rectangle ahead, the corridor filled with the noise of an intense firefight. Doors onto the mezzanine, Marcus said. It was just an empty gap now, even with the hinges left intact. You okay? Fine. You think I've got a death wish? No? Well, maybe sometimes. Hey, we do this together, okay? We always have, always will. Dom held up his fist, fingers extended. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Dom was first through the doors this time, even though he didn't know the layout. The noise hit him like a brick wall. Once he was on the mezzanine, it all became clear. He could see the whole ground floor of the mall from here. From the cave drapes that flanked the interior entrance to the blackened shells of shops that lined the ground level, lit by sporadic muzzle flash. Rossi was crouched behind a retaining wall of stone by the stairs to the basement level. And Aguirre, David, was slumped on the ground near him, surrounded by dark stains. Marcus sprinted to the far end of the floor overlooking the entrance. Rossi, he said. Rossi, raise the shutter now. Shit, can he get to the controls? Dom put one hand on the edge of the stone balustrade, preparing to vault over the edge. It was only 5 meters. Yeah, but it's onto a freaking boomer. He was so pumped with adrenaline now, so he set on sticking with Marcus no matter what happened. You comfortable, Adrian? That everything he looked at was sharp, intensely colored, and somehow both slow motion and flashing past him. Can he reach them? That used to be the security desk, Marcus said. He had his rifle in his right hand. He leaned on his left hand and slid his left leg onto the ledge, gaze darting between the entrance and Rossi's position. He's right on top of the hand-operated controls. The shutter shook. It started to lift. Stand by, said Dom. I go first, and you cover me, okay? Okay. Boomers took a lot more stopping than drones, and if you don't take them out in one, I'm backup. The entrance was way too close to Rossi's arc of fire. As Dom got ready to drop over the edge, it occurred to him that he could easily be caught in crossfire, but by then he was too pumped to stop. The shutter lifted high enough for the boomer to enter. It crouched under the barrier, almost squatting, then paused for a split second to look up. Marcus put a burst of fire through it. It didn't even slow the thing down. Boomers didn't seem to feel pain. Then he crashed down onto its back. This was a two-man job. Dom jumped too, boots first, and for a moment he wasn't even sure if he'd hit Marcus or the boomer, but either way it felt like slamming onto concrete. The boomer went down, face first. The force of the impact winded Dom. He tasted blood in his mouth. As the boomer rose to its knees to shrug them off, Dom was aware of deafening fire over his head, but nothing else. He caught the boomer in a chokehold, his arm closing around its squat neck, while Marcus emptied a clip into its gut. He fell back to reload. Dom jumped clear and carried on firing. Shit, those things really did take some stopping. Not even chainsaws did the job on them. Ordinary grubs, though, that was another matter. A drone came at them out of the rubble just as the boomer sank its knees, riddled with rounds. Dom turned to fire, but the grub jumped Marcus first. Shit. Dom couldn't get a clear shot as Marcus struggled with the grub. He revved up the chainsaw instead. Down through the shoulder, right through the main plumbing. Get off my buddy, you bastard. Marcus, hang on. But Marcus was already doing some carving of his own. His chainsaw screamed and stuttered against the armor. There was a precise technique to the saw. You had to put your weight behind it or else the blade skidded and didn't bite. The best action was a downward slice, leaning into the target. But Marcus was pinned on his back, cutting upward, and the grub was still thrashing around even though it couldn't close its weapons in. Dom sliced into its shoulder, and still the thing kept moving. But the boomer was out of the game now, just a shaking mound of meat on the floor. Somehow Dom kept it in his peripheral vision as he sliced into the grub on top of Marcus. He was sure it was never going to die until it bellowed and threw its head back, hurling him clear. As Dom scrambled to his feet, he saw a spray of arterial blood. Marcus rolling clear, then everything ground to a sudden, silent halt. The boomer was down. It still wasn't dead. How could it hold out like that? But it would be very soon. The things bled, just like any other creature. Any more? Said Marcus, jumping up. Is that all of them? Baird, Cole. I'm mopping up, baby! Cole rose up from behind a shattered column, opened fire, almost casually aiming his lancer one-handed. Dom turned in time to see a drone falling backward a few meters away, still firing at a neat arc that tilted up to punch into the vaulted ceiling. Nice, Marcus said, wiping his chin and stared at his palm. Shit. Cole looked down at the dead grubs with the faintest taste and prodded one with his boot to check for movement. Then he inhaled. I hate that smell. He sounded muffled, but it was just Dom's ears recovering from the noise. It ain't putting me off my dinner, though. Are we done here? Marcus looked around. Everyone okay? Rossi, you still there? Yeah, Rossi stood up. He was spattered with blood, and it could have been anybody's, even the boomers. I've called for case vac. David's in a bad way, abdominal wound, and I need to find Harry's rifle. It was a fact of life, driven by shortages. They had to retrieve what kit they could. Rossi and the last gear left from Echo Squad carried David out onto the open wait for the King Raven, then went back for Harry's body. Dom caught in that weird limbo between fighting for his life and instant boredom, found he had to keep moving. He kept seeing shadows that just weren't there. It happened when he pushed himself too far on too little sleep. He could have sworn he saw someone go into the mall. I'll go look for it, he said. Won't take long. Baird was rummaging through his pouches and pockets, fishing out ammo to reload. Chopper's going to be here in a minute. I said I'd look, right, Rossi? Rossi had a tight grip on David's hand. It didn't look like the guy was in any shape to grip back. Thanks. Dom picked his way through the mall, wondering what happened to the dead locusts if there wasn't a pile of corpses to be set alight to prevent disease spreading. Sometimes when he returned to his site, bodies were decomposing, and sometimes they were gone. Maybe the packs of feral dogs and cats scavenged them. It wasn't an appetizing thought. But he was sure the locusts didn't come back for their dead. They weren't like humans. They didn't pride themselves on leaving no grub behind. He took another look at the boomer. Shit, it wasn't dead. It still wasn't dead. Its eyes followed him as he moved around it, baleful and accusing. After all that, the thing was still hanging on, just like David. Dom aimed his lantern, then paused to flash Marcus on the radio. Ignore the firing, he said. Just finishing a job. He emptied his clip into the boomer. He wasn't sure if it was going to make it sure it didn't get up again, like the manual said, or if he was doing the decent human thing and ending its misery. It might have been a waste of valuable ordnance, but at least it was dead now. He waited for its chest to stop moving, and then cast around looking for Harry's lancer, ignoring the bodies. He'd been able to see some common ground with enemy troops in the Pendulum Wars because they were soldiers just like him, but locusts? They were like everything that was rotten in people, with none of the saving graces. There was nothing to pity, or love, or recognize. And they smelled bad. That smell clung to him until he showered it off, along with smoke and weapon residue. There was no sign of the lancer. Another flicker in his peripheral vision made him turn, even though he knew it was just fatigue. There was a retail unit right ahead of him, its doorway partly blocked by rubble. It was crazy, but he had to check. As Dom stepped through the opening rifle raised, he thought he'd walked into a slaughterhouse. The debris on the floor from the collapsed ceiling was littered with bodies. and in the smoky gloom he could pick out limbs jutting from the debris, and his first thought was that a bunch of stranded had been living here when the place come under fire. For a second, he recoiled, thinking he'd stepped on a body. With a loud crack beneath his boots and it sounded like bone, it sounded like plastic. Now he could see the bodies were just old display mannequins, stripped of every reusable material. He picked up a stray forearm. Even the small metal ball joints at both ends were missing. He felt stupid, but he knew he wasn't the first guy to make the same mistake in the heat of the moment. Dom could hear now the staccato of an incoming raven. He picked his way back toward the exit, squinting against the daylight from the mall that plunged the rest of the space back into the relative darkness. His gut rumbled, and he reached into his belt pouch for some dry rations to tide him over. It was then that he looked up, the edge of the foil packet still clamped between his teeth as he started to rip it open and found himself staring across the beam of a rifle's tactical lamp. He aimed before he could consciously work out what was happening. He fired. And that is the end of chapter 1, guys. We probably are going to do this book and the others chapter by chapter because they're about 30 pages long each. That seems like a pretty decent time, about 30 minutes. So let us know if you're enjoying the series down below. Let us know if you've played Gears 5. And as always, thank you for watching. Stay freaky.